The whole chapter we're going to cover today. And may God bless His word. We are so fascinated with the rich and the famous. I remember watching a show years and years ago, for a little while, the homes of the rich and famous. But now it's everywhere on the internet. Everybody likes to follow and see what they're eating, where they're going. We're fascinated, well, some people are, with YouTube stars, sports stars, movie stars, TikTok stars. But what is God fascinated with? How should we look compared to the rich and the famous? Are we to look like them, behave like them, or does God have something different for us? We're going to find out. I think you'll see it's something different. In verses 1 through 5 of chapter 25, we're going to look at the forces of evil and how they never stop. Now, 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, "Let the men of authority among you go down with me. And if there's anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him." So we have a new governor. Felix has been fired. His brother, who was in the audience of the emperor in Rome, lost his political clout, and so Felix got fired. And his replacement is Porcius Festus. That's the name he goes by. He now arrives on the scene. He's a rookie. This is his first assignment. He's the new kid on the block. Very little is known about Festus except what we have here in Acts. And then the church historian Josephus, you may remember that name. We talk about it a bit. He's the earliest historian of church history, writes one little tidbit about him. And it's a very interesting tidbit that Josephus writes. This governor only ruled for 3 years. He died suddenly. So he was there from 59 to 62 AD. And right after his death, Ananus, who was the high priest, had Jesus' brother beheaded. There was a gap before they could get the new governor in, and the high priest jumped on it. And he beheaded James and persecuted the church. Because you see, when the Roman governor was there, all capital punishment has to go through him. Remember Pilate? Remember Felix? He is the one that authorizes capital punishment. But when this guy died, the high priest, bam, killed Jesus' half-brother. Evil is through this whole leadership in Israel now, isn't it? Look at this. They were asking a favor because they were planning an ambush. They, the leaders. You remember last week in the last chapter, there was an ambush, but it was the 40 zealots. They had a special plan. But now it's the whole leadership. They were going to kill Paul. They were determined to kill Paul. Festus, probably because he was a rookie, and he knew nothing about this plan, of course, to kill Paul. He knew nothing about the previous plan to kill Paul. But he just said, "No, I'm going back to my home in Caesarea. You all come down." Maybe he didn't say y'all, but you all come down and bring your charges and bring whatever witnesses you have. You bring them to me in Caesarea. And he left. The forces of evil never stop. We see that today. You look and you read and your mind just gets boggled by some of the things that are going on in America right now. How in many states teachers are encouraging kids to flip genders or do whatever, not telling their parents. And even some states, in Minnesota, I think, is voting on a law to be an open state for being transgender as a child, where you can come and have all sorts of weird things done to your body and surgeries done to you that are irreversible. And it makes me crazy. What are they thinking? Some states have, after the Roe decision in the Supreme Court, have bragged about being open states for abortion anytime, right up to the day before you give birth. What are they thinking? There are things going on throughout the world where we just see the forces of evil acting in brutal wars in Ukraine, pure evil, killing children and old people, torturing them. Evil still goes on. Now, even though when I look around and I see things that really bother me, even though we see these forces of evil, there's one thing, even though we're shaking our head, we're all upset about it. We need to remember this. The power behind evil comes from Satan. And Satan has been defeated by Jesus on the cross. When he died and was resurrected, Satan is defeated. You are assured of that. Now, yes, we are in this already but not yet period of time we call. Already Jesus has come. Already Satan is condemned. He will be thrown in the lake of fire. But it is not yet completed because Jesus hasn't come back yet for his second coming, when all the world will be changed and Satan, after his 1,000-year imprisonment, will be thrown into the lake of fire. That hasn't happened yet. So Satan, in this period of time, still has power. And as we just read, horrific power, where he has Jewish leaders killing someone. They're supposed to be the spiritual leaders of the country. Evil forces in this country, evil forces in Russia. We see Satan, he still has power. But Satan will never stop trying to destroy the kingdom of God. But they will never, ever prevail. Never. Jesus has defeated Satan, and his end is assured. So after we see this plot and this evil, we now see what it means to be double-minded, and we're going to get into this a bit. In 6 through 12, as they came down, after he stayed with them a few days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, Paul, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, listen to this, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I've done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you will go. I'm going to do a couple other verses at the very end of this chapter, 25 through 27. But I found, this is Festus talking, that he had done nothing deserving of death. And as he appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore, I've brought him before you all, and especially you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. Interesting. Double-minded. So Festus followed through with his promise. He went down to Caesarea. And, we always hear about going up and down from Jerusalem. Well, Caesarea is on the sea. Jerusalem is up in the hill and mountain area. So you're always going up to Jerusalem. It's at one of the highest areas in the geography here. So they went down to Caesarea, and the Jews surrounded Paul and made all sorts of charges against him, but there were no witnesses. Paul denies all the charges. And then you read about this double-minded Festus. He knew Paul had done nothing, but he wanted to do a favor for the Jews. He's the new kid. It's his first governorship. He's just been there a few days. He wants to do some favors to the Jerusalem leaders because that's the area over which he was a governor. He wanted to do a favor, even though Paul is innocent. And when Paul, stands and directly confronts Festus, he said, look, you know I've done nothing wrong. And said, I appeal to Caesar, because he knew if he sent him back to Jerusalem, he'd be killed. And God had told him, you remember in that dream, God had told him, you're going to go to Rome and you're going to proclaim my gospel in Rome. Now, he didn't go to Rome the way he wanted to, did he? He went as a prisoner, but he appealed to Caesar because he could do that as a Roman citizen. And Festus, was relieved. He didn't know what to do with Paul. He wanted to get a favor to the Jews, but he knew this guy's innocent. Oh, hallelujah. You can just see his face. Yes, sir. Away to Rome you go. And so he got off the hook. But Festus knows Paul is innocent, absolutely knows it, but is bowing to the political pressures of the Jewish leaders. And does that sound familiar? We're going to be talking about that in just a few weeks, 6 or 8 weeks. Does that sound familiar? The Roman governor named Pilate, you remember him? And the Jews crying, crucify Jesus. And what did Pilate do? You remember a basin of water? Washing hands. Your blood's not on my hands. Given permission for the Jews to kill Jesus. Festus was going to do the same thing. But Paul, as a Roman citizen, pulled the trump card, and off he goes to Rome. Festus is double-minded. There's there's an interesting verse in James, and that is 1:8. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. This is someone who's washed by the waves, is wishy-washy. Festus went this way and that way. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And then Jesus reiterates that, you cannot serve two masters, but Jesus really lays it out in this verse in Revelation 3:15 and 16. I know your works. He's talking about the church of Laodicea. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. That's what Jesus says about double-minded people. You're wishy-washy. You go with the flow. Whatever the world says, you kind of go with it. You turn to me some, but then you're back with the world. You are double-minded. In this period of time, they talked about your mind and your heart. The heart was the seat of the emotions. The mind was where your soul was and your thought. And that's why, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and all your strength. And being double-minded or having a divided heart is also used, and we've talked about that, a divided heart, all means the same thing. Your mind is not fixed. Your mind is torn between two competing forces. Paul writes about this over and over. I know what is right, but I do what is wrong. Oh, wretched man am I. The world pulls you this way, and God is drawing you to him. And when you remain double-minded, Jesus said he's going to just spit you out. Choose, either be all in or be all out. You can't have it either way. You cannot ever be half in with Jesus. Never. We saw Left Behind, my wife and I. We went to the movies for the first time in about 10 years. No, we go a little more often than that. We saw the Left Behind movie, and one of the parts of that, Left Behind, was a preacher. That's pretty sad endorsement of the preacher, isn't it? All the Christians are all gone, and the people left behind are unbelievers. And he's a pastor. And he said, I've been preaching, but I never really believed the words. He came to Christ, confessed his sin, and he repented, and God, of course, accepted him. This is all, a movie. This is nothing in Scripture. This is just somebody's imagination of how it might be being left behind. But he did not have saving faith because his mind was double-minded. He was only half in with Jesus. The rest of his mind was over here in the world, tempted, doubting, questioning. He was not all in for Jesus. He was double-minded. Satan and his evil forces will never, ever stop trying to destroy the kingdom, but they will never prevail. Jesus has defeated Satan on the cross, and his end is assured. And we can never be half in with Jesus. He wants us to serve him and him alone. This chapter closes with a pageant, and it's kind of crazy looking. In verse 22 and 20 through 24, then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with military tribunes, prominent men of all of the city. Pomp. And they came, and Festus, the king, King Agrippa, and all who were present, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought to not live any longer. Pomp, I love that word. The interesting thing, I'm going to go Greek on you a little bit. The literal word in Greek is phantasia. It's in a different tense because this was, don't worry about the tense. Anyway, it's a noun, Fantasia. I remember a movie called Fantasia. Some of you young folks, you've never heard of it, okay? Old geezers like me remember, it was one of Disney's first movies, really. and it was just a fantasy land with colors and very beautiful. But Fantasia was the name of the movie. Well, that's the exact word. It's called transliteration, meaning the Greek word and the English word are one and the same. And that's the word used here, with great fantasia. All these people come traipsing in. In those days, their fabric was interwoven with gold and silver thread, pieces and thread. They had jewels, I imagine earrings, necklaces, headdresses. They were prancing around in great pomp or fantasia, fantasy, pomp, or pageantry is what those words mean. It was like going to this upcoming Oscars deal, coming down and getting your picture taken. Everybody's all decked out in all sorts of jewelry and beautiful things. But listen, when Festus introduces Paul, the whole Jewish nation, Paul is known by everyone. He's known more than anyone in the whole country right now because of his sacrifice for the Lord. And so he comes in, he's brought in from prison. He's wearing his regular clothes, which would be really very shoddy clothes, a tent maker. You know, it'd be like torn up jeans and a sweatshirt that's beat up with holes in it. That's what Paul looks like amid all of this fantasia, all this colorful, gaudy, jewel-covered audience. Here comes Paul. But yet Paul is known throughout the world. He looks so out of place. But really, who's out of place? Who's out of place? Agrippa. He's the Agrippa II is his name. He's the son of Agrippa I, great-grandson of King Herod the Great, who killed all the babies when Jesus was born. These are men who were known for their evil and murderous life. That's Agrippa. Not only that, Bernice, you just see the word Bernice there. Well, that's his sister. And guess what? They very likely were living together in an incestuous relationship. So how's that for Agrippa? He's not so hot. Bernice, not only is she'd been married several times before, back with her brother in his kingdom and probably having that relationship. She went on to have an affair with Titus, who was the next in line. He was an emperor in Rome. She was having an affair with him. Titus wanted to marry her, but they wouldn't let her back in Rome. I mean, the Roman people wouldn't allow that because Bernice was Jewish. And so she hopped, obviously, from bed to bed and ended up back with Agrippa. This is who these people are. And then Festus is the most double-minded, wishy-washy politician. Have you ever seen that in a politician? Somebody who says one thing, does another, tells you they're going to do this, and then they lie and do just the opposite. Yes, you've seen that. So the only person who stands in this great audience hall, it's called, who stands before the Lord is Paul. And how he handles himself is exactly the way the Lord teaches us. He says in Micah 6:8, He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? What does God require of you? To do justice, to love, loving kindness, or mercy. That's the word hesed in Hebrew, which means steadfast love. And to walk humbly with your God. You keep your work clothes on. You don't have to dress all up. You stand before God and you share His testimony. That's what he requires. And Paul is the only one doing that. In my toolbox at home, there's a number of tools that are probably 80 years old. There's a gentleman whose name is Harry Boyd. I love that family. My mom would drop me off, and I guess they kind of babysat me, Harry and Gay Boyd. That was a wonderful older couple, couldn't have any children. I think she more did it for them, so that they could have a little kid to play with. I don't know. I just enjoyed being there. I'd go out with Harry into his tool shed, and he'd do stuff. He worked for Norfolk and Western Railroad back in the day. They had locomotives. This is back with locomotives, folks. And he had a serious injury at work, so a heavy piece crushed part of his skull. And he ended up, they put a plate in, but he was paralyzed, so he could almost totally paralyzed on his right side. So he would hobble around, and we would look at and do some things, fiddle in the work shed. When Harry died and his wife had to go into assisted living, she gave me these tools. There's a ball peen hammer, there's a box wrench, some chisels, and I still use them some. And I love those tools because Harry, bib overalls, very, very poor, but loved Jesus with all of his heart. He was never double-minded. Even with his injury, he did not complain. He did not gripe. He did not hire a lawyer for $1 billion suit against Norfolk and Western. He said nothing. He smiled. He loved Jesus and walked humbly with his Lord. And that's what God calls us to do. And I pray, as we prepare our hearts for communion, that we will do likewise, that we will not be double-minded. We will see evil around us. We can remember it will be defeated. We will be not just half in for Jesus, and we will walk humbly with our God. Pray with me.